I'd like to introduce Admiral Mike Boorda, our Chief of Naval Operations. We're going to talk about the investigation, the actions after the mishap, and the actions the Navy has taken since Admiral Boorda has read the investigation. We will not be talking about the investigation itself.
Okay, Kendall.
I asked our new Vice Chief, relatively new, Admiral Jay Johnson, to come down with me. Jay's an F-14 pilot, and I'm going to make sure he gets to answer a question or two, not because he needs to be in front of you, but because he has the most knowledge on the technical aspects of it. And Denny McGinn, who you've had a chance to answer some questions, is also here with me, and I'll decide, which one of us is going to do it. Let me tell you a little bit about. You need me to be over there?
Yes, sir. I think we pick up better on the.
We need a bigger CNO. Probably a lot of people would agree with that. No, I was just kidding. And as Admiral P said, I'm going to talk about actions, but I want to focus on a few. And I know if I don't talk about the ones you want, we'll leave enough time for questions so that we'll talk about whichever ones you want. After the mishap, there was a safety stand down. That's not unique. It's not something you wouldn't expect to happen. We had a rash of accidents, and it was clear to the aviation leadership that a stand down made sense. But the stand down was really in two parts, and I'd like to explain that a little bit because it led to some decisions and some actions. First, there's nothing standard about a stand down. Each squadron does it its own way. But in the more routine way, squadrons went through these kinds of things. And I've been listening to the briefings and some of the questions today, and so I know you've been talking about these. That's what you would expect to have happen. Each squadron did that, and they had a 48-hour period to do that in, and about a 10-day period when they could pick the 48 hours. Why did we do it that way? It was decided by the type commanders, the two aviation leaders, that it made sense to not rush the squadrons to the safety stand down, but instead let them plan them so they got the most out of it. And this is something that happens in naval aviation and made good sense. But something else happened as well. Because of the concern about engines and about other things that might have caused the accident, mechanical things in the airplanes, we had a hard look at F-14 accidents ever since there have been F-14s, with a real emphasis on the last 10 years or so, looking for common problems, seeing if there was something someone had missed, and was there anything common in the 3 F-14 accidents we experienced in such a short time. There were 2 of the airplanes, not the one in Nashville, that had the newer engines, the 110 engines. The airplane in Nashville was an F-14A with a TF-30 engine. We did not find common things. We didn't know the answer at that point. But not finding common things told the technical community, the manufacturers of the aircraft, the maintainers of the aircraft, the pilots of the aircraft, NavAir, it told them that they should bound the operation of the aircraft, shrink the envelope it's operating in a little bit, because the airplane operates very well in its envelope, and not let it get outside that or outside the edges. And that is why you saw afterburner usage curtailed, speed at lower altitudes curtailed, to keep the airplane in controllable limits for sure. You're never 100% sure of such things, but this was the best technical judgment we had, and so we did that. It's okay, Kendall, I got them. We began a review of the FNAB process, and I'm going to talk more about that later in some detail, so I'll just skip over that right now. Obviously, there were several accidents out in the Pacific Fleet, and so they began a squadron safety program review. Again, it's not something brand new. It's something squadrons have been doing a long time, but they used the Safety Center also to begin to look for things they could do to be safer. It is what you would expect them to do, and they did it. Not routine at all. The captain of VF 213 was relieved pending the outcome of this investigation and a review by his chain of command. That now is recommended to be a stronger relief, a relief for cause by the investigating officer, and I will wait until that goes through the chain of command before I have a comment on that. It is fair for that to be, and proper that that be endorsed at the proper levels in the chain of command before we deal with a person's future. But it's a very clear recommendation in the JAG. You can read it as well as I can. Digital flight controls. I don't know how much you know about them. It was a test program, also done with the United Kingdom. The tests were done in December. I will be quite honest with you, we were not going to fund them. We looked at the time that the F-14 has left, and the F-14As will be out of the inventory in 2004, and said, this is about $80 million, does it make sense? Then we had a rash of accidents. About that time, we got the results of the tests of digital flight controls that ended in December '95, and they were good, and we changed our mind. So to be quite honest with you, these accidents did cause us to change our mind, and I think it's a good decision. We have $9 million in this year. We have found the money, and it is available and being spent. We will have $31 million next year, and we'll finish the program with $40 million the year after. It will help pilots know when they are reaching those outer limits of the envelope and help them keep the airplane in it. You've heard in other accidents, engine breather pressure sensor modification to the valve. Basically, and if you need more technical detail, either Denny or Jay can talk about it in a minute when we get to questions, but basically tells the pilot that there is about to be a problem and lets them retard the throttles and save themselves from the problem. That has been a problem with this airplane, and that is a fix that will work. And we will have that done by the fall of next year in all the A model airplanes.
Will not have to burn a fire?
I'll get to questions later. No, it really is something that causes a stall. The Safety Center began a review of air wing procedures and operations and maintenance. You would expect that when you have accidents. There's nothing very unique there. Let's talk about post-investigation actions, and because we're going to be limited in time, I want to hit the ones which I think will be, I'll do them all, which I think will be of most interest to you and may prompt the questions for me. FNABs, Naval Aviation Evaluation Boards, have a chain that looks at them right now, which could include, and did include for Lieutenant Commander Bates, the squadron commanding officer, the air wing commander, and the first flag, in this case the battle group commander, on the ship. And if the aviator is going to be returned to a full-up flight status, that's how far it goes. In this investigation, and I know you've asked some questions about that already, in this investigation it appears that there were clues and cues about, let me say this, and I want to be clear about it. This is not a bad comment about Lieutenant Commander Bates. Lieutenant Commander Bates was a fine person. In fact, one of the reasons he stayed in the cockpit was he was a hard worker. The people in the squadron recognized that. He gave it his best every day, but he was having some trouble flying the airplane. And you know about the accident in '95 and so on. That doesn't mean he was a bad officer. He was a good one. It does mean he was having some problems. We want to get after this process and get confident again that good safety decisions are being made in this process. And so in order to do that, for a time uncertain, I have made the Vice Chief the final reviewing authority on FNABs here in Washington. That used to be done by the Chief of Naval Personnel. I have ultimate confidence in Skip Bowman, the Vice Admiral who's the Chief of Naval Personnel. But he is a 3-star admiral and he is a submariner. And though I may be the CNO, I'm a 4-star admiral, I'm a surface officer. And so we went to the most senior aviator here and said, this is an aviation decision by somebody who knows how to fly airplanes and has a lot of experience. And he will review FNABs to be sure that they focus on the one thing they're supposed to focus on, not what you are or where you are or how good a worker you are or anything else, except can you fly the airplane safely and effectively. That's his charge and his charter, and he will carry it out. And when we get confidence that that's how we're looking at it, then we'll review the process again on how we do it. I know that this has been talked about. I'd be glad to come back to it, but I was listening to the questions you were asking, Admiral McGinn, and they were on these points, so I won't do that again right now, but I'll be happy to come back to it if you like. Mandate attendance at Aviation Command Safety School. It is encouraged now, but not required, that the commanding officer and CO attend this school, which is held out at postgraduate school. As a result of what I have read in the investigation, I think it would be good, and we will do it. I sent out the message a few moments ago that requires, before an officer can become the executive officer or commanding officer of a squadron, he or she must go to that school. For those who are now commanding officers or executive officers of squadrons who haven't been yet, they must go to that school by 1 November of 1996. Why did I pick such a long date? Long time. Not because it isn't important, but because we do have deployed squadrons right now, and I don't know how many of those haven't gone. We'll be checking that out in a few days, and I don't want to take the leadership off the carrier to return it home to go to school when it needs to be on the carrier. So I've said in the message that I want this to be as fast as it can be, but that time lag is allowed for those who are now deployed. And anyone going into a squadron will have the school. It will give them awareness of many of these things that we're talking about here. Let's see, one more.
Behind the one on
Oh, behind this one. I knew that, Kendall. Tough call here. Recommended by Admiral Smith, recommended by the senior aviation leadership, concurred in by me, and the decision accelerated to yesterday. And it's done. And that is, we are terminating the Naval Flight Officer to Pilot Training Program. There are some Naval Flight Officers in the training pipeline right now. I believe that number's 11. Kendall can get it for you exactly right if I have it wrong by 1 or 2. They will be allowed to stay in the pipeline. It wouldn't be fair to them, and we will simply see how they're doing, and they have to be able to pass and do all the things safely. They will go, when they graduate, to aircraft that have side by side 2 pilots. They will not fly aircraft like the F-14 or F/A-18. History, the advice of people who have flown airplanes, our accident rates, the cost effectiveness of this program all tell me it's time to stop doing this, and so we are. There are 3 pilots in Fleet Readiness Squadrons, RAGs, and they are going to continue on, and again, just like we are going to do and should be doing with every pilot, we will watch closely and make sure they can fly safely. I told you that that we are going to make the Vice Chief, I have made the Vice Chief the final reviewing authority on FNABs. Because this investigation showed that there were signals of difficulty we should have seen and didn't, I want the Vice Chief, and have directed him, to review the FNABs from that air wing that have taken place for the past 3 years. It won't be a large number. We have about 40 in the whole Navy every year, but it needs to be done. I need to be sure and have confidence that the right decision was made for safety reasons in every case. And that is his charter, and he will do that. And he will do that by a date certain this summer. I don't want to keep people worrying about it, so we will do it very quickly. The temporary afterburner restriction that we have placed on the F-14B and D is directly related to the accident in the Pacific off San Diego, and we believe that was certainly a contributing factor. We recovered those engines and saw an anomaly in one of them. So the afterburner restriction on the F-14B and D will remain until that investigation is complete and we are sure we have a fix so that it's not dangerous. The good thing about this airplane with the more powerful engines is that it's capable of supersonic speeds without the afterburner, doesn't require them to take off under loaded conditions either on the carrier or shore. You saw the tape, and we know we need more training. As I got ready to do this and got ready to brief the Secretary of Defense and tried to learn more about this, I sat in a lot of discussions with pilots from the Navy and the Air Force and the Marine Corps. And as we talked about what Lieutenant Commander Bates felt, or the investigation believes he felt as he bunted over, every pilot that I have talked to said, I have felt that, I understand that. I immediately got on the instruments because I knew what was happening to me. We need to train more in that. There's no question about it, and we will. I think I've talked long enough, and I know you have some questions, so I'd be happy to answer them, and if I can't, I've got somebody that can. Ernie?
Your review of all FNABs in Air Wing 11 indicate there's a problem beyond VF-213, the Black Lions. What specifically is it that you've seen that require you to extend that investigation?
I want to know that every pilot who is flying an airplane who has had a difficulty that would cause a FNAB was evaluated fairly on the ability to fly the airplane safely. And that's all. That should be the only criteria. I want to be sure that is the case. What we find in Air Wing 11 may want us to do, make us want to do some more, but I don't think so. And I do want to look at them all. The Vice Chief is now empowered to concur and leave it as is, or to change it. And so he needs to do that very quickly because we do have people who will be wondering about their future.
Follow up if I can.
Sure.
Why Air Wing 11 specifically?
Air Wing 11's had a lot of accidents, and VF-213 and this accident were in Air Wing 11.
Admiral, you say that this...
Ernie, let me go back one. We are going to do an accountability review. I've tasked the Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet and Commander of Air Forces Pacific to look at Lieutenant Commander Bates's FNAB and the JAG that followed it and be sure that was done properly. And it's an accountability and responsibility review. As we do that, it will tell us how deeply we need to go into other things.
Do you have faith in the CAG at this point?
Yes, right now. I have read the investigation. I have not. What we're doing is a little bit unusual, Ernie, in that I've taken some actions before I got all the endorsements. But the actions I have taken are ones that generate safety and move the process along more quickly because I think it needs to be moved along more quickly. I think I would not be doing my job if I didn't do those. When we start talking about individual people deserve full consideration by the chain of command in the right order, and we'll do that.
Admiral, you said that this pilot, in your words, he was having some trouble flying the airplane. And you say that there were signals of difficulty we should have seen but didn't. Granted, you have the advantage of hindsight now. But in your
Yes.
opinion, given what's going on, should this man have been flying that plane?
And you know, one of the things that is the most difficult things to do about this case is you're talking about a person who gave his life for his country.
I understand.
He gave it in a terrible crash, and other people died too. And the most important thing to me is the families, and so your question's a hard one. I'm going to answer it. I'm just telling you why it's so hard for me. I'd like you to suffer through this a little bit along with me. He was a good officer, a conservative officer. If you read the JAG closely, it may well be that all his good work and the fact that he was such a good person made them give him a bigger break. That's exactly what the Vice Chief will not do as he reviews these. His review will be based on, can you fly the airplane safely? We will go back and see. I think we'll probably overturn very few of these, but we need to do that. Now, in the case of Lieutenant Commander Bates, there were signals there in 20/20 hindsight that should have caused at least another FNAB, and I think a different result. But let me, because I have never run a FNAB, and I'm not an aviator, I'm just an officer who read this and came to that conclusion. Let me ask the Vice Chief, who's done many of them and been a squadron commanding officer, for his opinion. Jay?
Well, sir, I think the,
Sir, we need you to
I agree with what the CNO just said, and would only add that in this particular case, I think he merited perhaps some more scrutiny, and I don't know what that would have yielded, frankly, in terms of a different end state. But we've learned enough from this to put us comfortable with the fact that we need to reassess the process just to make sure we're doing it right.
I'm rationalizing a little bit about how I feel about losing somebody, a lot of somebodies. Let me say that if this loss does makes us safer because we pay attention and we learn what we can learn from this, it will have even contributed a little bit more. And we're going to not miss the chance to learn everything we can from this. If you look at this investigation, it is very thorough. Yes.
CNO, a question for you, and then one in a follow-up sense that would be perhaps better answered by the VCNO.
Sure.
Question for you is, I've talked to a lot of F-14 drivers since the Nashville accident. And there may be the usual bravado here, which is understandable, but to the person, they claim that regardless of the power of the A model vis-a-vis the D model, that if you're a capable F-14 pilot, you learn to fly the engines and you learn to fly within the envelope of what you have, and you have no difficulty. So my question to you is, the digital flight controls, obviously nice to have, but did you get pressured when perhaps it's not needed for the majority of the pilots flying F-14 simply because of the accident? And the second question to the VCNO is, talking about Lieutenant Commander Bates, is it abnormal, would you say, to take up to 10 seconds to recover from a disorientation and get back on instruments again?
I'll certainly let the VCNO do the second one. Let me tell you, I didn't get pressured on the first one, on putting those in. It didn't take long to figure out that if you save 1 or 2 airplanes, you pay the cost of this. And at the rate we were losing airplanes, it was a good business decision, as well as being a good decision thinking about people. And so that was why I did that. I didn't get any pressure. Had I gotten pressure, I would have done it before I got the pressure, because the 3 accidents made it real clear to me I should be doing everything to these airplanes I could to make them as safe as I could.
The question to the VCNO about the
VCNO? 10 seconds to try to recover out of this. I don't know if he really had the full 10 seconds, but VCNO can talk about it.
10 seconds is not a very long period of time. If you are task loaded, as has been described by Admiral Smith in Nashville, and I think Admiral McGinn talked about that, if you are task loaded such that you have to deal with more than one thing at a time, which you would in that very dynamic environment, and very importantly, as we've described and you saw on the tape, your body is essentially lying to you, which it is, then 10 seconds of distraction can go by in a heartbeat.
A follow-up, I'm not going to quibble with you, but 10 seconds can be an interminable amount of time, and to someone who is skilled in quick reaction, which you have to be to fly high-performance jets. He's in an almost vertical rate of climb. Admiral McGinn said that the overcast was at 2,300, the tops, I believe, around 10,000. He'd been cleared to 15,000, I understand. We may never know, but it would seem logical to climb out till he got on top and then to orient himself IFR, if you would.
Let me give you the layman's answer because it's a pretty educated answer. I've worked Jay could answer this a lot better, probably, and we'll go back to him if he doesn't quite agree. But I thought about it like that too, and I asked the same question you just asked, and that's why I want to answer it. When you really look at what happened to that airplane and you look at those hits they got on the FAA radar, and that was the only real way that airplane could have flown, that was the way the simulator and the pilot in the simulator did. He wasn't sitting like this. He had unloaded the airplane. He was coming back to what he thought was a more normal rate of climb, having done that 3G pull-up, and he was leaving the Nashville area in a normal, more routine, unrestricted climb to 15,000 feet, except he wasn't. He thought he was bringing that airplane down to something like 20 or 15 to 20 degrees nose up, angle of attack. He wasn't doing that at all. His body was lying to him, and he was bringing the airplane down left and nose down. There wasn't 10 seconds after that happened. He punched through the clouds, and there it was. The reason I answered that myself is because I really didn't understand that until I asked the question, had him go over it with me a few times. We're really talking about 1 or 2 or 3 seconds of reaction time after he got in trouble.
Admiral, how do you explain the on this report talks about a 10-year record of this squadron being poor performing. Why did the Navy tolerate it for so long?
I don't have the list of accidents with me, but if you look, they come in kind of clumps. And we have accidents in the Navy. That's awful to say. I'd like to tell you that we don't. I'd like to tell you that none of the other services do, but we do. And it took this kind of an accident to cause this kind of action, and we can all argue and wonder about the other. Let me tell you what's been happening in naval aviation, and I think it puts it in a perspective, the response to your question. But I need to say I'm not trying to excuse anything. This is a tragic accident. There are lessons learned here that we should have learned sooner. But in 1994, we had our safest year in over 80 years of naval aviation history. In 1995, we were just a little bit above that. And the way I'm thinking about that is accidents per 100,000 flight hours. It's the way everybody computes it. And so 94 was the best. 95 was not quite as good, but still our second best in history. Today, this very day, compared to last year at this time, we are better. So what happened to us this year is we had a long period, the longest in our history, of no accidents at all. We had a rash of accidents, this being one of them, and obviously the most visible, but all important. And now we're back on a normal curve, or even a little bit lower again. It caused us to take this kind of action and hard look. And it appears that what we did got us back on a normal curve, even as we were doing this. It's not an excuse. I'm not trying to make one. It's just a fact.
If I could follow up,
Sure.
there's a